The buffalo was down. Its breath rattled out in long, wet pulls, blood foaming pink at the nostrils, one back leg circling slow against the dirt like it was still trying to run. Every rule the body understands says an animal like that is finished. So the young hunter did what every nerve in him was screaming to do. He started walking toward it, spear loose in his hand, already tasting the praise waiting for him back at camp. That single decision, walking toward something that looks dead, has killed more hunters across 10,000 years and every inhabited continent than starvation, exposure, and venom put together. Back up a few hours. The camp wakes before the sun does, because hunger doesn't wait for daylight. There's no meat left from the last kill, just scraps boiled twice for broth, and everyone in that band, child to elder, is going to eat or not eat based on what happens in the next several hours. This is the part people forget when they picture the hunt. It wasn't a sport. It wasn't even really about courage. It was the entire economy of survival, riding on the judgment of a handful of people walking out into grass taller than their heads, carrying weapons that could maybe, if everything went right, kill something strong enough to kill them first. Among them is a boy who's hunted maybe a dozen times. And an old man who's hunted for 40 years and still has all his fingers, which, once you understand what's actually dangerous out there, is its own kind of remarkable. Here's the question worth sitting with. What was the actual difference between the hunters who lived to be old and the ones who didn't? It wasn't strength. Strength gets you a spear thrown a little farther. It wasn't even courage, not really. Plenty of brave men died young. The difference was something quieter and stranger, and almost nobody talks about it. Picture what you think a great hunter looks like. Probably someone fast, strong, maybe fearless, the guy who runs the animal down. That image is mostly wrong, and it's wrong in a way that got people killed. The hunters who survived decades in the field weren't the strongest in the band. They were the ones who trained themselves to notice things other people's eyes slid right past. A change in a bird's call. A patch of grass bent the wrong way. The exact moment an animal stopped grazing and started listening. Their bodies weren't their main weapon. Their attention was. And attention, it turns out, is exhausting in a way muscle never is, which is exactly why so few people were actually good at it. Start with the wind, because the wind decided almost everything before a single spear left a hand. A grazing animal's nose is its first warning system, often better than its eyes. So hunters tracked wind direction constantly, a pinch of dry grass thrown into the air, a thumb wet with spit held up to feel which side cooled first. They'd loop wide, sometimes for an hour, just to come at an animal from the direction the wind was already moving toward them instead of away. One gust shifting wrong, one hunter forgetting to check it, and an entire stalk that took all morning to build could collapse in 4 seconds, the herd's head snapping up in unison, gone before anyone had even raised a weapon. You learn to fear wind that switches more than you fear the animal itself. But the wind only gets you close. After that, you have to read the animal, and this is where it gets almost unsettling how precise it had to be. An alert animal and a panicked one look similar for about half a second, and that half second is the entire window a hunter has to decide what happens next. Ears swiveling but head still down, still safe, keep moving. Head up, full stop, weight already shifting back onto the haunches. That animal is one heartbeat from running, and chasing it now means chasing it for miles across a herd suddenly suspicious of everything. The good hunters could read which animal in a herd was sick or old just from how it stood, weight slightly favoring one side, head a fraction lower than the others. That's the one you go for. Not the strongest. The compromised one. Cruel, maybe. But that's the whole game. And then there's the ground itself, which to most people is just dirt, but to a hunter who actually knew the work, it was closer to a written record. A footprint holds more than a shape. Depth tells you weight. Stride length tells you speed, and whether that speed was steady or breaking down. A print that drags slightly at the toe, instead of lifting clean, can mean an animal's already hurt, maybe from a predator, maybe from age, maybe from a hunter's spear days earlier that never finished the job. Read it wrong, and you spend 6 hours tracking an animal that's perfectly fine and will outrun you forever. Read it right, and you know exactly how much fight is left in what you're chasing before you ever see it. Which matters more than almost anything else on this list, because the thing that was actually left in an animal's body was never as simple as anyone assumed. Here's the part almost nobody expects, the detail that separates the textbook version of hunting from what actually happened in the grass. The most dangerous moment of a hunt usually wasn't the chase. It was after. An animal that's down, bleeding, breathing wrong, looking finished, still has a reserve most people don't know exists. A surge of adrenaline that can put a wounded, dying animal back on its feet for one last, furious burst, often aimed directly at whatever's closest. Cape buffalo are still famous for it today, wounded ones circling back to ambush the very hunter tracking them, waiting in cover for the one moment a person gets careless. Lions, bears, boars, all the same story with different teeth. The kill wasn't the end of the danger. For a lot of hunters, it was the beginning of the part that actually killed them. So the experienced ones did something that looked, to an outsider, almost like cowardice. They waited. Not for a minute, sometimes for 15-20, doing nothing but watching the rise and fall of a downed animal's ribs from a distance, throwing a stone at it from cover before anyone got close enough to touch it. They watched the eye. A dead or truly dying animal's eye goes flat, unfocused, doesn't track movement. An animal that's still tracking you with its eyes from the ground, that's not a corpse. That's a threat playing dead, or close enough to it that the difference doesn't matter. The old man in our camp had a rule he repeated to every young hunter under him. The kill isn't finished until you've been bored watching it for longer than feels necessary. Patience wasn't a virtue out there. It was the actual skill. The one that doesn't show up in any story about a brave hunter, because waiting quietly in the grass doesn't make for much of a story, until you understand it's the reason there was a hunter left to tell one. Which brings us back to the boy, walking toward a buffalo that's still kicking, spear loose, already composing the version of this he'll tell at the fire tonight. The old man doesn't shout. Shouting spooks things that might not be as finished as they look. He just says one word low. Wait. And grabs the boy's arm hard enough to leave a mark. They stand there, watching. The animal's breathing slows, then catches, a wet shudder running down its flank. Its eye is still open. Still open. 30 seconds pass. Then a full minute. The boy's legs are shaking with the effort of standing still instead of moving, which is its own kind of strange, the hardest thing he's done all day, and he hasn't lifted a finger. Then finally, the eye goes glassy. Unfocused. The leg stops circling. Only then does the old man nod. The boy never forgot it, not the kill, the waiting. He'd tell people later that the day he became a real hunter wasn't the day he learned to throw a spear well enough to bring something down. It was the day he learned to stand completely still next to something he wanted to believe was already dead, and not move until he was certain. That's the part the stories leave out. Survival in the grass was never really about who was bravest, or fastest, or strongest with a weapon. It was about who could hold their nerve in the empty, boring, unbearable minutes after the danger seemed to be over, because that's exactly when it usually wasn't. The hunters who lived long enough to grow old weren't the ones with the best stories about the chase. They were the ones with almost no stories at all about the moment right after, because they'd waited it out, every single time, until there was nothing left to tell. So here's the question worth sitting with. In your own life, when something dangerous finally seemed over, were you the one who walked toward it, or the one who waited?